All right, so for the second part of this video, we are going to talk about interval notation a little bit more and with a little bit more detail. And so I'm going to introduce that to you right now. One thing that I want to say before we even start is the fact that for something to be considered increasing, it has to be an interval. You can't say a point is increasing. So if you can look at number 13 from our lesson, I think it's clear that we see that this section of the graph is increasing, right, class? But it would be improper to say that it is increasing at -7, the point -7 for x. It starts to increase at -7, but it doesn't actually increase at -7, right? That's the beginning of the increase, but you can't say that something is increasing at a specific point. That's why it always has to be an interval. Okay, only intervals can increase or decrease or remain constant, right? Specific points are never considered increasing, okay? So for what values of x is the graph increasing? So x, it's increasing from -7 all the way to 2. And we're going to write this in what we call interval notation like this. Okay, so what does that mean? I know you might think that this looks like a point or a coordinate point, but there's another way that we can read this in math. Okay, this is not a coordinate point. Instead, this is kind of like where it starts and where it ends, right? So think of it as starts, ends, right? That's what interval notation is. It starts to increase from -7 to -2. Obviously, it decreases from -2 to +2. It remains constant from this section, 2 to 6, and then it starts to increase again. So it increases. This is where we use a U. U is kind of like just saying in addition, or there's more. There's another section that's increasing, and the increasing section is going to be from 6, comma, and comma just means it's kind of like dashed. It means continues from 6 to. Now, this doesn't actually stop. So when it doesn't stop, that's where we use the infinity, because it basically means that this will continue to increase forever, because an arrow technically never ends. So to recap, we know that it's increasing from -7. Remember, intervals always deal with x, and it increases from -7 to -2, and then it doesn't increase again until 6, the value of 6, all the way to infinity, right? Now, you can't be part of infinity. You can't touch infinity, and that's exactly why we use parentheses. Later on, we'll learn about using brackets, and brackets talks. It's kind of like the less than or greater than or equal to sign. It's when you can include the value. But right now, for intervals of increase and intervals of decrease, we're just using parentheses. Okay. For what values of x is the graph decreasing? Well, like I said, we're decreasing from -2 to 2. So you simply just write it like this. We're only talking about the x values here. And then what values of the graph is constant? Constant means you're not changing. The slope is 0. You're constant from 2 to 6. And you write it like this, 2 to 6, right? So the interval notation that we're using, I know it looks like a coordinate point, but really you have to think of it like 2 to 6. This comma is kind of like the word to, right? And it's constant from 2 to 6. -2 to 2. Okay. I know it's a little bit confusing. Why can't math create another notation for this? I don't know. I think it's just that's the way we use to do it, and that's how we read it, and that's how we write things in interval notation. Okay, so we have 3 more practice problems, and let's get right to it. Draw a graph that is decreasing, constant, and then increasing. State the intervals where you're decreasing, state the intervals where you're constant. and state the intervals where you're infinitely increasing. All right. So let's just start from -8 and let's just create a hypothetical point at 7. And I just decided that because I don't know, I felt like it. And let's just kind of make this interesting and go all the way to -4. Let's have -4 stay the same until +5. And then let's have 5 shoot up and increase into an arrow, which means that is continuous, and it will keep going if you were to graph even more. Okay, so state the interval where it is decreasing. So this is the portion that's decreasing in my graph, and this is my example, but we know that it's decreasing from -8, the x value of -8 to -4. And that's it. You just write it like that. This is interval notation. State the interval where the graph is constant. Well, the graph is constant from -4 to +5. Your graph could totally look different if you wanted it to, but this is the graph that I'm using for this example. And then from 5, it increases, and it doesn't stop increasing. It literally increases to infinity. So the interval that it is increasing is from 5 to infinity. We know that it can never touch infinity, but if you were to keep going, it would continue to keep moving. Okay, the next two examples are very, very important, and it deals with describing the X-intercept and the Y-intercept. This is something that you will see in Math 1. We do this a lot, and it's good that we're doing this right now to practice for that. So it says state the X and Y intercepts for each graph as ordered pairs. The one thing that students forget to do all the time is they forget to write the X-intercept as an ordered pair, right? So again, what is an X-intercept? It's where the graph touches the x-axis, just in case you forgot. Okay, and obviously we know the y-intercept is where the graph touches the y-axis, but sometimes we students and we just forget that the x-intercept is where it touches the x-axis, right? So I see the x-intercept right there, and it's touching the x-axis there, and it's touching it at 3, 0. The y-intercept, coincidentally, is also at 3, but you would be terribly wrong if you wrote 3, 0 for the y-intercept. You have to write 0, 3 because we know that the corresponding, or we know that the variable is always going to have the value, and the other variable, the alternative variable, should always be 0. Intervals of increase, remember, intervals always deal with x values, right? So these are always your x values, and x values. And you know that intervals of increase will be from here. We can see it from 3 to infinity. Your interval of decrease is only from 1 second, or whatever this actual unit is, but it's only from 2 to 3. That's where you're decreasing. And then your interval of constant is from -5 all the way to 2. Oops. Okay. I feel like once you get the hang of this class, it starts to become pretty simple. You're just reading the graph, and we're kind of writing data, or we're kind of writing like properties of the graph. And it's important that we do this because when you look at data and you look at a graph, you want to know when it has a positive slope. You want to know when it has a negative slope, right? So, yeah, this is important stuff. Okay. So let's go over number 16. Let's locate the x-intercept. Now the x-intercept is already stated. It's given right here. Notice how the x value is given and the y value is 0. So that has to be the x-intercept. The y-intercept is also given right there. So it's kind of nice. It's luxurious that they already wrote it for us. And then the interval of increase is going to be very similar to what we were just doing. Okay. The interval of increase seems like it's from here, this point, which is 2, and it only goes from 2 to 3. Notice how it's not an arrow this time, so we do not want to use infinity. Okay, it's just 2 to 3. The interval of decrease is just here, which is -1 all the way to 1. And then it seems like we actually have two areas that have interval of constant, which is one is right here, which is from -3 to -1, right? -3 to -1. And then I'm going to put a U, which means there's more. There's another one, and it's simply just from 1 to 2. And that's it, class. That was a lesson on features of functions. I think the first page with all those definitions is definitely something you want to be comfortable with. If you have more time, we could definitely practice more. Your homework is going to revolve around this, so please make sure that you review the notes that I post and make sure that you understand all these definitions. And then if you have any questions on how to write things in interval notation, see me during office hours. I'd love to clarify any questions you may have. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.